India's special forces are in the news after a super successful surgical strike inside Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Can they go deeper? Can they go to Muzaffarabad? Can they go close to Lahore? Can they go to Muridke? Can they take down Lashkar-e-Taiba chief and India's enemy #1, Hafiz Saeed? We'll be looking at that. But before that, let's just begin by getting an understanding of who our special forces are, how big is the different teams that form the special forces, and the kind of operations they've pulled so far.
They are the fiercest warriors of the Indian forces. Daring to carry out the missions that seem impossible to others. The special units of the Army, Air Force and the Navy, among the elite fighters of the world.
Born during the Second World War, para-commandos, as we know them today, were essentially extremely well-trained soldiers who could be parachuted into the enemy territory. Indian Army's first experience was when the 1st Regiment was raised by Major Meg Singh. The Indian Army first deployed them during the 1971 war with Pakistan. Today, the Army sports at least 9 para-special force battalions and 5 airborne battalions, each with about 600 plus well-trained soldiers. These para-commandos, as we know them today, are trained in covert clandestine operations like the one we just witnessed.
The Navy's Marine Commandos, formed in 1987, specialize in amphibious warfare. Their first mission was during India's intervention in Sri Lankan civil war. The Marine Commandos go through one of the most stringent selection procedure with tests called Hell's Week and Death Crawl.
The Indian Air Force's Garud Commandos constitute the youngest special force in the country. While their main mission is the suppression of enemies' air defense capabilities, they also are trained to undertake combat search and rescue, jungle warfare and diving operations. As of now, the Indian Air Force has close to 900 Garud Commandos, but after the Pathankot terrorist attack, plans are afoot to increase their count.
Apart from the Armed Forces Special Unit, the National Security Guard under the MHA specializes as a counter-terrorism force. But the most covert force in the country is the Special Frontier Force, which works with the Research and Analysis Wing and reports directly to the Prime Minister. These are the best of the best. The Rambos of the Indian Armed Forces, the foundation of the wall that protects the nation. They can't be seen, they come unheard, wreak havoc and strike terror into the hearts of India's enemies. With Jugal Purohit and Anindya Banerjee, Bureau Report, India Today.
Just after India's surgical strike, India's Army Chief, General Dalbir Singh Sahag, today went to Kashmir to say a big thank you and to greet and meet the Special Forces commandos who pulled off this operation. The PR wing of the Army tweeted, and I quote now, met officers and men who successfully executed surgical strikes, reviewed situation and operational preparedness. I want to introduce our guests. We'll be looking very carefully at the abilities our Special Forces have and comparing them with Special Forces from the US, the UK and Israel. I want to begin by introducing Sushant Sareen, Ajay Sani, one of India's foremost experts on counter-terror. Manoj Joshi has written a scathing piece. He believes India can't smoke out Hafiz Saeed. He's joining us via Skype. General Katoch has headed India's Special Forces, been in charge of the regiment of the Paras. He's joining us as well. Also with me is my colleague Shiv Arur, joining us from Washington. He's the author of a new book which ironically is about the Special Forces and about a mission inside Pakistan. That's about as much I can give away about Shiv's book without him and his publishers wanting to kill me. Okay, so welcome to all our guests. Before I begin the conversation about the abilities our Special Forces have, let's just spend a moment and assess what it takes to be a Special Forces commando. This is the most rigorous training in the world. A human being pushed to the extremity, physically and mentally. Take a quick look at how tough it is to be a Special Forces commando.
Special Forces Commandos of the Indian Army, India's paratroopers. The strike force formed to drop behind enemy lines and catch them unaware. These paratroopers wear the maroon beret, and pinned to their chest is the Balidan badge, the winged blade of sacrifice, a badge to die for. Earning this takes intense months of rigorous training. 23 men are selected from all over the country who go through a 90-day grueling probation to make the cut. From evading capture, demolishing structures, surviving in the wild, to providing medical assistance. These forces are trained to tackle anything that comes their way. During the initial months, these men are made to take 10-kilometer walks with a load of 30 kg on their back. Towards the last phase, they run a distance of 100 kilometers with a 10 kg load, both uphill and downhill. These units specialize in clandestine operations behind enemy lines and destroy pre-identified targets, like the recent surgical strikes in POK. Among the oldest airborne units of the world, these paratroopers special forces were first deployed in the 1971 war and were later used in Operation Blue Star, Operation Cactus and Kargil. These special forces go without food, sleep, water to complete their training. Defending the country's pride and honor is what keeps them going. Bureau Report, India Today.
So can India mount an operation to smoke out Hafiz Saeed deep inside Pakistani territory? I want to introduce our guests once more. General Katoch has headed the regiment of the Paras. With us also is Manoj Joshi, Ajay Sani, Sushant Sareen and Shivarur. We've done a quick SWOT analysis. We've seen the prowess of India's Special Forces, but what is it that they lack? Let me take our viewers through some of the constraints that the Special Forces would have to deal with if they were ever to mount an operation which has the audacity of intent to take down Hafiz Saeed. First and foremost, do our Special Forces have adequate specialized foreign language skills and cultural training? If you're going into, say, Maldives, if you're going to Burma, if you're going to Sri Lanka, if you're going inside Pakistan, do you understand Pashto? Do you understand Dari? Do you understand the languages over there? The ability to blend deep in hostile territory is crucial because, after all, if you see what the US forces have been doing, they've been striking deep inside ISIS-held territories, which require you sometimes to stay there for a while before this operation gets completed. Therefore, if you've seen Homeland, for example, the ability to be able to speak the local language for some Special Forces commandos is crucial. Also, knowledge of local languages like Pashto, Dari, Burmese, Maldivian, Sinhala. American Special Forces have access to high-end reconnaissance and communication satellites which provide them with real-time, instantaneous ability to spot the enemy, monitor his communication and to plan operations accordingly. Also, if you look at Operation Geronimo, which had US Navy SEALs going in to Abbottabad, taking down Osama bin Laden, their helicopters had advanced stealth technology which enabled them to enter Pakistani airspace undetected. They lost their helicopter, but they were able to come out, disabling Pakistani radar systems. Also, one of the other problems, of course, is that the Indian Special Forces have very limited interoperability. The Garuds, the Marcos, the Para Forces, so Army, Navy, Air Force, Special Forces don't necessarily have the ability to operate with one another. Finally, you need assets on the ground which will provide you with human intelligence to back the Special Forces operation. We remember Inder Kumar Gujral was the Prime Minister who wound down India's covert capabilities, and since then, for many years we didn't have these abilities. By and by, those abilities are being brought back. So I want to go across to General Katoch first. General Katoch, if you were to be asked whether the Indian Special Forces that have struck shallow across the LC have the ability to strike much deeper, what would you say, sir?
Rahul, let me put it this way, that even after Osama bin Laden was killed, I was asked similar questions. And my response was that if the nation could put us in the Abbottabad compound like the American forces were, we could have probably done a better job, if not a similar job. Now, all along what has happened is that the policy of employment of special forces has been confined to tactical level raids, direct action raids. And that is what happened this time also. Of course, this time was different because it was on a widely dispersed area, and that psychological barrier was broken where a signal was sent to the Pakistanis. Now, as of now, the language training depends on who has been tasked for which particular task. But the fact is that we do not have a policy to employ these special forces at the strategic level, and that exactly is what should be happening today. Now, for that, we have not organized the special forces potential that we have.
Okay,
which is
so that answers a bit of a yes and a bit of a no. You're saying if we reach Abbottabad, we can pull that operation and come back. But Manoj Joshi, getting to Abbottabad and coming back is the tough part, because once you're there, Osama bin Laden had very limited protection around him, very few armed guards. So the whole challenge is going in undetected, coming out despite the Pakistani army and the Air Force reacting. So that really is the challenge. So does that mean that the answer is no, India doesn't have the ability to pull off an Operation Geronimo? Manoj Joshi.
Not at this time, certainly not. We do not have the capacity to penetrate covertly the Pakistani airspace, land people. It would be it would almost be a suicide mission if we do it under the present circumstances. So you need, as you yourself have pointed out, you've listed the issue of intelligence. If you know that how US satellites see this guy walking up and down and exercising in his compound, they sent in this agent, this gentleman who has been imprisoned by the Pakistani doctor, veterinary doctor, who was...
mission. You're suggesting that if we were to go in at this time, it would be akin to a suicide mission. Sushant Sareen, your thoughts? We've heard two nays so far, one a bit of a yes and a bit of a no. Manoj Joshi categorical in saying we don't have the abilities. What's your assessment, Sushant Sareen?
See, I would probably go along with General Katoch more than anybody else, because I think he knows of what are the capabilities. I think you are being rather presumptuous when you compare the capabilities and the capacities of the Indian SF in a very total kind of a framework with those of the Americans. I think you're comparing apples and oranges, and as General Katoch says that since we have been limited in the kind of operations these guys were to carry out, the American operations are vastly different. But also take into account that the Americans operating, for example, against the IS, it's not necessary everybody knows Arabic. All the SF guys or the SEALs fellows who are operating out there, they have a couple of translators also. Also, please bear in mind that much of the opposition against the Americans is pretty useless. Let's face it. You know, whatever else we might say about the Pakistanis, it is a somewhat professional army. And then when you talk about somebody like Hafiz Saeed, please remember that perhaps after the Army Chief of Pakistan, he's probably much better protected than even the Prime Minister of Pakistan. So I think you need to keep into account that. Having said that, it is not necessary for India to carry out a Rambo-style operation, or for that matter an Abbottabad-style operation. If you're fighting a pig, then you can fight in a somewhat more dirtier manner rather than, you know, a rather chivalrous kind
interesting
of an
thoughts
action,
there from Sushant Sareen. I want to bring in Ajay Sani.
And I'm
he
sure,
spent a career looking at counter-terrorism measures. Mr.
Well.
Sani, your sense on whether the Indian Special Forces can take down Hafiz Saeed?
You see, you were articulating it in a very difficult way to answer quite simply. Are you talking about the fighting capabilities of these units? In which case, I think they represent some of the best. Are you talking about Indian capabilities to actually locate with full intelligence and full detail of the area around the kind of protection this man has, his movements, and then to target him? You must understand, these are small unit operations. If the man is surrounded by a few hundred people with very even more armed men in the close vicinity, as General Katoch said, this would be a suicide operation and nothing less. So if we are talking about an Abbottabad style operation, and as he said, if you could get them in, they would probably do a better job and be extracted. But if you are talking about Hafiz Muhammad Saeed and the circumstances he is operating under in Pakistan, I think Sushant put it very well. I mean, he is probably the best protected man in the country after the Army Chief. So this is not the right question to ask. What we should be talking about is a completely different kind of covert operation, not a group that is quickly inserted and extracted, but a group of covert operators who will infiltrate the group itself and then carry out a different kind of an operation. So
okay, Shivarur,
simply
your
not
book,
the same. There is no
it's
comparison.
called Operation Jinnah.
Yes.
The excerpts are out just now. Do you believe this is possible only in fiction, or can India mount a Geronimo-style operation? You've been studying India's special forces and where we stand right now.
My book centers around a very realistic sort of special forces operation inside Pakistan occupied Kashmir. It's coincidental that India actually mounted this operation at this time, but I actually happen to agree with elements of all of our experts today, and what they say is very important. I just wanted to make one quick point about the Abbottabad operation, Rahul. It wasn't really, and Ajay Sani touched upon this, I think that's very, very important. It wasn't just about putting the troops in there and then extracting them, and whether India would do a better job if our boys were able to be inserted in that area. Let's remember that the Abbottabad Operation Geronimo, involved human intelligence over many months or years. It was an operation that was built up based on a huge amount of surveillance and intelligence until Osama bin Laden in that compound was actually chased down. So it's not just a smash and grab kind of situation. There are no real comparisons, as Sushant Sareen also said, between the Indian context and what the Americans actually did. Theoretically speaking, something like this should be possible. This is something that would definitely involve. I agree completely with Ajay Sani. It would involve deep cover, extended covert operations, and not just a limited short duration tactical strike like the one that happened on September the 28th.
I think what's very clear by listening to our guests is you need to prepare for years to be able to pull off an operation of this nature successfully. It's not about what you do once you get to the compound. Your ability to get in, get out, and also ensure that you've gotten to the right place. All of that requires years of preparation, and it requires a national will, a commitment from the government. to be able to ensure that you build those capacities very carefully at whether the Indian Special Forces have the ability to take down a target deep inside Pakistani soil. I've got General Katoch, we've got Shiv Arur from Washington, we've got Ajay Sahni, Sushant Sareen and Manoj Joshi with us on this broadcast. And before I get back to our discussion, let me take you through the abilities of the other premier special forces of the world, the Americans, the Israelis, the British Special Forces, and take a look at some of the most audacious operations they've pulled off.
The world's most lethal special forces, highly trained military units well equipped to perform unconventional, unorthodox covert missions. Meet US Navy SEAL 6, the team that killed Osama bin Laden. SEAL stands for Sea, Air and Land Special Operators. From the Barrett M107 rifles, Carl Gustav to combat knives, these forces are known for superior physical and mental strength. One of the oldest special forces in the world, Britain's Special Air Service for special forces all around the world. Their insignia bears the famous phrase, "Who dares wins." C8 carbines form the regiment's primary assault weapon. Israel's Special Forces unit, the Sayeret, are famous for daring operations such as the Entebbe hostage rescue. Sayeret is tasked with the most difficult terrorist neutralization and intelligence gathering operations during battles, and holds notoriously grueling selection camps for potential recruits lasting several sleepless days. The German GSG-9 was formed in the wake of the Munich Olympic tragedy, a proficient force skilled at resolving hostage and terrorist situations. The German GSG-9 have even provided training to India's NSG commandos. One of the most aggressive and brutal special forces in the world, involved in the anti-terrorist operation Moscow Theater Siege of 2002. The Russian special forces were criticized when it used chemical gas in order to knock out terrorists, leading to the killing of 129 hostages as collateral damage. Bureau Report, India Today.
So how do the Indian Special Forces compare with the Russians, the Israelis, the Americans and the British Special Forces? Let me tell you a bit about all our three special forces, starting of course with the Special Para Forces, which have been in the news after this big surgical strike. So the Para Commandos, we've got 9 battalions of Para Commando Special Forces. There are a total of 5,580 Para Commandos. It was formed in 1965. The first time they were deployed was during the 1971 India-Pakistan War. They've also been used extensively during Operation Blue Star, during Operation Cactus in the Maldives, and quite often across the line of control for strikes on Pakistani assets. Then their main skills are surgical strikes and extraction from behind enemy lines. Let's now come to the Marcos, that's the Marine Commandos. They have a total strength of about 1,200. The Marcos were formed in 1987. The Marcos are naval commandos. They were deployed in 1988 in the Sri Lankan Civil War for the first time. They've also been used in an operation in the Wula Lake. They've been used during Operation Pawan in Sri Lanka. They were also used, although they didn't see any action, but they were deployed during 2611. Their main skills are that they're amphibious, they can operate both on water and on land, and they too can pull off surgical strikes in a different theatre. Then you've got Garud. Garud is the Air Force's Special Forces wing. Their total strength is about 900. More battalions are being raised. They were formed in 2004. I in fact attended their raising day on the first day that they were formed. Apart from this, they've seen some action in the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Congo and also during the Pathankot attack. Their main skills are combat search and rescue, raids on enemy bases. So I want to now go across first to General Katoch on how would you compare the Indian Special Forces, General Katoch, with the Israeli, the Chinese, the Russian, the American and the British forces?
Rahul, actually we've been doing joint training with the USSF, the Spetsnaz, the German special forces, the Israeli special forces, and the French and the UK also. So they compared pretty okay. That's not a problem. But there are, in our case, there are equipment shortages because the very rapid expansion which has taken place, which is not so in, say, in the USSF, the expansion rate is 1.8% per year, whereas at times we have taken it to 120%. So what has happened is that the equipment has got distributed and there are shortages. Otherwise, training-wise, it is not a problem.
Hey, but Manoj Joshi, in your article, you list out many problems. We're looking at the weapon systems that the Indian Special Forces have. They are far more advanced than what the Indian infantry has. But when you compare them with, say, the Special Forces of any other modern military nation, there's absolutely no comparison. They're actually quite antique.
Absolutely, because I think, you know, we have to differentiate between special forces and special operations forces. Special operations are the kind of things you do as was done with Osama bin Laden, which involved intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, etc. Mix of things. And I think more important than the technology is the question of command. Meaning, as you recollect, in the case of Osama bin Laden operation, this was led by the president himself. I mean, he was sitting there in the war room and looking at the operation. So what our special forces need, and I think General Katoch referred to the issue of strategic versus tactical. We need the tactical, we need the strategic element to come forth clearly.
That's very, very important, Manoj. Ajay Sahni, that's a very important point that Manoj makes, that you need political will, starting right at the top of the executive, the will to build capacity over years, if not decades. You can say you want to pull off an Operation Geronimo, but unless you build capacities, which we haven't done over decades, the answer is not going to sound very pleasing.
Absolutely, and you see, it's not just as Manoj has said, this is not just capacities of units to fight, it is also a question of intelligence building, it is a question of insertion and extraction. But most importantly, what I'd like to emphasize over here is that everyone has vulnerabilities. If you decide that a particular target in Pakistan is to be taken out, and you begin with the kind of relentlessness that was displayed with Osama bin Laden in the American case, where they actually pursue this individual alone for 10 years, and for 10 months they had this single location, the Abbottabad residence, under multiple layers of surveillance, including satellite surveillance, human surveillance, technical surveillance of all sorts. And then they had felt that they had enough material to actually launch an attack. I am very, very sure that if that kind of relentlessness and that kind of resource, understand how much resource was put in the last 10 months, the CIA had to go to Congress to get funds approved in addition to whatever was its discretionary allocation, just to maintain surveillance on this one residence in Abbottabad. So these are not something where you use the Rambo analogy several times. This is not about Rambo. Rambo has the director and the scriptwriter on his side. These are unscripted operations. Absolutely. And they require tremendous preparation, for which we are completely at this point of time. We do not, I think, even in our political spectrum, our strategic planning segments of our government, I don't think we even have an idea of the magnitude of what we are talking about when we say we're going to take out Hafiz Saeed.
Very significant comments, those from Ajay Sahni and Sushant Sareen. The political spectrum is what Mr. Sahni mentions, and that is so important. The fact is, ever since Inder Gujral was the Prime Minister, we haven't ever built the capabilities. It's something that, as a pacifist Gandhian nation, we actually shunned away from, not even wanting to talk about it, build the capabilities. Now, when you wake up and say, okay, can we pull off an operation of this nature, the answer is not one that people would like to hear.
Rahul, two things. Number one, I think the question, if your question is how do the Indian SF compare with the rest of the world SF man to man, I think they're as good if not better. So on that I don't think there's any doubt in my mind. Then the question comes of capabilities and all the other stuff which goes into building up your capability to do the kind of operations that we are right now talking about, and that is where the lacuna come in. I see, you can keep blaming Mr. Gujral, but you also had a Prime Minister, somewhat of a clownish guy like Morarji Desai, who said that, you know, spying is a very immoral thing and I will not allow it. So you've had these kind of characters also becoming Prime Ministers of India. So we have actually degraded a lot of our capability which needs to be built up. The problem, however, is, and this is something which I've joined issue with everybody in the government circles, that for 25-30 years you have been facing this kind of violence from across the border, this export of terrorism, and it didn't start with Kashmir, it started with Punjab, and you could even go back to the northeast in the 50s and the 60s. My point is that every time that you ask somebody, we say that we don't have the capability. For God's sakes, had we started building up these capabilities 10 years, 15 years back, today we would not have been asking this question.
Absolutely.
So I would say that let us start yesterday, or let us start today, for God's sakes. Let's build up these capabilities. In the time that we require to build up all these capabilities, we can carry out the kind of operations that we've been carrying out, perhaps even somewhat more deep penetration kind of strikes, which are possible 15-20 kilometers. For example, if you have the kind of intelligence that Hafiz Saeed is visiting some border area along the LOC, maybe you can think of carrying out some kind of an operation against him. If nothing else, even if you are not going to be able to kill the guy, you can at least put the fear of Allah in him. He doesn't have it right now. So there is a lot you can do, but you have to start building that up. And if we are going to go back to sleep after what has happened now, and then after the next attack again ask these same questions, then we can keep doing these kind of debates, but it's a completely pointless exercise.
Any thoughts, General Katoch, on how much time it will take to build these capabilities? Let's assume the Modi government, Ajit Doval himself says that, okay, let's go out and do this. How much time do you think it will take to build the human intelligence capabilities, the technical wherewithal, the communication abilities that are required to be able to come anywhere close to the Israelis or the Americans?
Rahul, let me put it this way, that first you have to have a policy to employ these people at the strategic level, and then only you have to have the element or a special forces command directly under the highest political authority, and that is how you're going to build up the capability. Because what the USSF is also doing, they are doing it in concert with the CIA. And it is not that you suddenly get up and you say, all right, in 2 years' time we can do something like in Abbottabad. So unless we have that sort of organization at the level where you can employ them at the strategic level, then only this capability can be built up. For example,
and Shiv, what's very shocking is that in India we've never had a conversation around this. You know, it's almost as if the special forces have been looked at something that you don't want to talk about. Any other country, you know, one of the things that Jaishankar said to the envoys he met was that what would your country do if you were to be attacked by an enemy country like India has been attacked in Uri? The problem is in India it's somehow been considered to be a bad thing, something that should never be discussed and spoken about, Shiv.
Which is precisely why what Sushant Sareen says is so important. This is a fantastic opportunity. This paradigm that India has by actually officially talking about a covert surgical strike in Pakistan is an invaluable opportunity, not only to focus the nation's attention, which is already being focused on special forces operations, but actually generate, enough of a debate around it to actually get those things going. What Ajay Sani said is bang on. Relentlessness of political backing, a technical ecosystem that is finely aligned and tuned to the kind of operations that our special forces, might need to be employed for, national objectives in POK or in Pakistan, Murid K, wherever. The fact is, it has to happen now. This is an opportunity. The fact that this debate is happening, the fact that we've got, the country's finest experts actually saying there is an opportunity here to actually get everything aligned. This is an opportunity to get the country behind what India needs to do. Let's forget about what happened in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. The special forces definitely don't get the attention that they need. They certainly, I completely agree with Manoj Joshi. You know, comparing us with the comparing special forces with the infantry is a very, very low bar to
absolutely. Absolutely. Why should you compare them with the infantry? The infantry doesn't even have new rifles to fire with. You have to compare them with the Israelis and the Americans. And Ajay Sahni, in conclusion, it's not something that's a bad thing to aspire to. Why should, if we've got the money, we're one of the world's largest, fastest growing economies. If there is consensus nationally, we can give them the equipment that's required. We can build the human intelligence capabilities that are required. And regardless of whether we do an operation or not, let's make Hafiz Saeed believe that we are coming for him. Keep him alert, keep him awake, keep him stressed.
First of all, you just said we have the money, but what we see is that there is a continuous squeeze on security expenditure in this country. While there is a nominal increase each year, if you just factor in inflation, we are actually spending less and less each year, both in internal security and defense. So we do have a very serious problem about the political will to back up our aspirations to be great powers and have great armies and great security forces with the kind of investment it's going to take. Number two, as far as particular individuals are concerned, as I said before, everyone has vulnerabilities. You keep on saying, can we take out Hafiz Saeed in Murid K? We don't have to take him out in Murid K. He's going all over the place. As Sushant Sareen said, you can get him when he's vulnerable along, one of the border areas. There will be many vulnerabilities that can be exploited over time, but essentially over time. None of this is very well, the operation that was done, the surgical strike we've done, is actually a more elaborate operation on a paradigm or a pattern in which such operations have been carried out by our forces again and again in the past. So
Absolutely.
There's no real paradigm shift other than the fact that this has been openly accepted and announced. What
that by itself is a
really
game changer. I'm out of time. Gentlemen, I see
just
Sushant Sareen has his hand up. Sushant, very quickly.
Exactly.
20-30 seconds. Come on, Sushant. Final words.
No, just two things. Number one, the reason you could carry out those kind of surgical strikes, even though they were shallow strikes, is that because you had built up that kind of intelligence and you had a knowledge of that area, so you knew where exactly these guys had to go and how exactly they had to hit these fellows. You had studied the pattern. Number two, I think it is extremely important, which General Katod said, that you have to have this synergy between various parts of the government, where the SF is on the cutting edge, but you have to have the RAW, the military intelligence and the rest of the shebang coming together, getting together the information, providing all the details so that a successful operation can be carried out. You can't expect a successful operation if you're going to be working in silos and protecting your information as though it's some kind of
Absolutely. This whole business of not sharing information with other agencies, not working as a team. If it's Team India, Special Forces, RAW, IB, NTRO, all of them need to work in unison. Ajay Sahni, Sushant Sareen, Shiv Arur, General Katoch, Manoj Joshi for joining me in the India Today War Room. Thank you very much. National consensus, national will, and ability to think in the future with the same level of intensity, even when there's no operation. Preparing, building, crucial for success. Thank you very much for joining us. News and updates continue when we come back. Yes.